closing here. He's addressing the fleeing, talking about what the prosecutor is going to say. Consciousness of guilt. He booked that flight. He wasn't supposed to leave for several days later. Defense counsel's addressing it there. Do you believe his strategy with the way he's addressing it is a good one?
Absolutely, because the defense will not get another chance to talk, right? The point is that he has one go. He has to give this closing and make sure that it covers everything. Because the burden rests with the prosecutor, they get the last word. And this can be incredibly difficult for the defense because then the prosecutor can bring something up, connect some dots, make an argument that just cannot be addressed. And so it's the last thing left with the jurors. So the defense attorney has to address these things. He can't just leave them out there. There has to be this argument in the jurors' minds when they hear the prosecutor's final statement, that closing statement, so that they have it addressed when they go back into deliberations. Because the truth of the matter is, regardless of where the presumption of innocence lies or where the burden of proof lies, if there is a question in a case like this where there are emotions, a jury often defaults to doing what they emotionally want to do. And because of the emotionality of the alleged victim's testimony here, they might want to give her justice. And while that is not proven beyond a reasonable doubt, they want to. And so they're looking for an excuse. That's not how the presumption of innocence works. That's not how the burden of proof works, but it is all too often what happens. So the defense attorney is doing a great job addressing what will be brought up so that it is addressed by the time the jury hears it.
During his testimony on yesterday, the defendant I'm talking about, he says that he walks into the room, sees those two, and leaves 2 hours, gives them their privacy, then eventually goes back in. He hears Liam snoring like a freight train, doesn't really notice the girl at all. No one's in his bed. The bed has not been unmade. Opens the bed up and goes to, sits in bed, and then he notices the girl gathering her stuff and leaving. His version of events is so different than hers in that the bed is made and there's no woman in the bed. She then, it would have to, if he's telling the truth, have to have made the whole thing up, not a mistaken identity. The whole, I left Liam's bed because he was snoring and he was spread out like a starfish, is what she said. So I went to this other bed and slept. His version says that's not true. To make such a distinction, it really puts the jury in a position of one of you is lying and the other one is not. Other than, like nuance, well, I got there and she was in the bed, but I didn't touch her. No, he's saying she wasn't even in the bed. Who does that help, if anybody, and to what extent does it really come down to who they believe?
I mean, this is a case of he said, she said, right? But in my mind, I believe the fact that it is such a departure helps the defense, because it just makes more sense if someone is lying, right? If he didn't know, right, whether or not there would be DNA evidence on her or marks on her or anything like that, would be that he came back afterwards, found her in his bed and, laid in bed anyway. Or maybe even crawled in bed before realizing that there was someone else in bed because it was dark, right? There are so many, I guess if you would want to say, better lies that he could have said if this was a lie. But then again, you have the prosecution who might argue that, how would that be true? Even if she's intoxicated, how is everything that she recalls after her intimate encounter with the other individual, Liam, so wrong, right? How is that explained? But I would argue that it doesn't make sense for either of these lies to be so separate from one another. And so if it doesn't make sense for either of them to be so separate, there is still a presumption of innocence and there is still a burden of proof.
Yeah, and Ashley, the burden of proof is so high. They're supposed to be firmly convinced that he did it. And I just, I don't know how they're going to fall here, but that's why the prosecution has such a high burden. I don't know. We'll see what happens. Ashley, thanks. We're going to squeeze in a break. We're going to have the remainder of the closing argument from defense counsel coming up right after this quick break.